Now I'll be going into the history of Judaism, which is a slightly different topic than the history of ancient Israel, or Israel itself. We see the shaping of the religion of Judaism that emerges out of ancient Israel, but um, different contexts create different set of circumstances that I feel the necessity to separate them and to do separate sections. And I think that sometimes the misconception, just in my kind of anecdotal day-to-day goings-ons, to say that many Christians that grow up on reading the Bible, a Bible-based Christianity, in other words, a non-ritualistic, but where they're actually getting into reading the New Testament or the Old Testament, look at the Jewish religion often through the eyes of the Bible. And by that, I think that there is a skewed understanding of the way that Judaism has evolved, and there's a little misunderstanding here and there. That's just been my experience growing up around those kind of communities, and actually to say for myself on a personal level as I grew up and how I was exposed. So I will just get into this, and we'll see why I'm saying that. I'm gonna go. Okay, so we're talking about Second Temple Judaism. Remember that the temple was originally destroyed, and so this is then it was rebuilt, and it's called Second Temple Judaism. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So we return to Alexander the Great. We can't escape him anywhere, just like Napoleon later on. As we remember, he and his successors retained much of what they took over from the Persians, and they left the structures of the administration, the administration structures in place. So to take us back again and remind us, Alexander the Great, he plows through. Remember, he goes all the way from the near Syria, Lebanon area through, if you recall. The Jews greet Alexander the Great, and he's kinder to them, and he walks into Egypt, and the Persian administrators put their hands in the air and they say, "Go ahead," and the Egyptians greet him as a liberator. And then when Alexander the Great dies, his generals take over and fight for power of different parts of the territory, and some take over Egypt, the Ptolemies, and then you had the Seleucids in the northern part, and so on. So you had a kind of Hellenization process. I talked about Greco-Egyptian society. We're really talking about a Greek influence combined with local elements that is going to take over the region, and it is going to heavily affect Jews. So Hellenization of the Jews. Let's talk about that. First of all, Hellenization, again, is Greek elements fused with other things. And so just for example, the foreskin. Jews would get circumcised. And many Jews wanted to blend in with Greeks, especially, let's say, elite Jews. You go to the gym and you want to hang out. You change your name. You don't go to temple. But in the gym, you can't get rid of your Jewishness. Well, why? They worked out naked. You had all these Greek men with, to be vulgar, pointy, they had their foreskins, right? And so, as one documentary commentator said, the Jews stuck out like a sore thumb, right? And they didn't want this. It was talked about in First Maccabees, which is a book of the Bible. It's in the Septuagint and the Catholic Bible. The Protestants removed it, and the Jews don't believe it's inspired either. But there was mentions in First Maccabees 1:13 through 16 this issue, and we find also in historical evidence there was a device called the ephispasm that was it was able to try to put on a fake foreskin onto Jews who wanted to look like they had a foreskin. And My understanding is it was kind of a disaster, trying to put something back onto your private part, doing all of that just to fit in. Okay, so there was a strong influence of Hellenization and influence and people wanting to be like the Greeks. And the Jews, who usually wanted to be separate, were also no exception to being kind of seduced into Hellenization at the time, in this period. And so again, I just want to clarify, I'm taking the starting point here of basically around the time of Alexander the Great and forward. Okay, so you have the Seleucid dynasty and King Antiochus, 175 to 164 BCE. And so there was the Ptolemies, remember, in Egypt. He ruled here in the part of the, what is now Israel / Palestine, Syria, and so on. And he basically was determined to Hellenize the Jews, or there's a question of whether he was taking sides in the Civil War, why he wanted to impose, when we know that the Romans and the Greeks were polytheistic and they usually didn't impose religion in the way that he was doing here, but we know he took issue with the Jewish religion, and he prohibited circumcision by death. Copies of the Torah were being confiscated, and then keeping of the Sabbath was forbidden. And then he erected an altar to Zeus in the Jewish temple of Jerusalem and sacrificing pigs. Now we know that sacrificing of pigs was an insult because that's considered an unclean animal to Jews. And then, of course, a graven image in the statue of Zeus. This would be highly offensive. Okay, and so this is what they were going through then. All right, but when you push people like that, they can only go so far. And there was a Jewish revolt, and there was a rise of a group often known as the Maccabees or the Hasmoneans, and it was led by an aged priest, Matthias, of the priestly Hasmonean family. And it's also known as the Maccabean Revolt of 175 to 134. You know about this revolt, but you may not know that you know, because it has to do with the holiday of Hanukkah, okay? Which is a holiday that has been not one of the major holidays of Jewish life, but because it falls in the Christian world so closely to Christmas, it's really kind of took on a certain kind of prestige, and most people know what Hanukkah is due to that fact, I think. He basically, leads this revolt. There's a killing of the commissioner, refusing to do sacrifices to Zeus, and then he, as a high priest, leads his 5 sons and supporters into the desert to wage a guerrilla warfare. And in 165 BCE, his son Judas Maccabeus recaptures most of Jerusalem and restores Jewish worship in the temple. And then there's going to be Jewish independence by this regime until 63 BCE, with the Romans as the next phase of imperial powers in the region. And so Hanukkah it means in Hebrew rededication, and it was the rededicating of the temple to Yahweh. Remember, they didn't pronounce God's name, but in other words, the God of the Jews, Hashem, the name, the sacred one. And so that's what the story is behind that. Okay. Let's see here. So who were the Hasmoneans? The Hasmonean Dynasty. They expanded their boundaries. In 132, the boundaries of Jews were only in Judea, very small territory. By 100 BCE, they actually expanded, took over more land, and they converted non-Jews to Judaism. That's right. This is written about in Josephus' works, first century Jewish historian. This isn't a normal thing within Jewish history, but in fact, while it's a religion, it's not considered a converting religion. they did force convert. And I'm going to end right there, and we'll go back and I'll kind of discuss a little bit more about that aspect and then continue on with the Hasmonean Dynasty.